You're listening to The Breakup Theory, conversations about ending things and collective liberation. Today I'm sharing a conversation I had with one of my favorites, Dean Spade, about his recent book, Love in a Fucked Up World, out with Algonquin Books. Dean has been an inspiration for a long time with his commitments to abolition, anti-Zionism, and trans liberation, among other things. His previous book, Mutual Aid, came at a perfect moment when people were getting together in response to COVID-19 and the George Floyd Uprising. This new book has also appeared right when we need it, when we are feeling worn down and scared and need to find better ways to connect with each other. His thinking in the book lines up very closely with things that concern me, namely trying to act beyond politics and finding anarchism in relationships and building bottom up from there. Dean starts from the idea that all of our movements and struggle are based on our relationships, and if we can't get those right, how can we expect to work together to end this world and build another? Love in a Fucked Up World finally gives us a self-help book for queer anarchists. It contains so much insight matched with practical suggestions to help guide you through your own stories and the ones you project on others that get in the way of real connection. It really moved me in moments and gelled certain ways to understand myself in relation to others. Our conversation goes into nitty-gritty relationship issues and then zooms out to the ways these affect our collective work. We talk about how anarchists and leftists deprioritize and avoid doing this internal and interpersonal work, only to find out that all of our problems appear in every place you go. It's so important to talk explicitly about our social needs and how our collective work fits into them. We can't separate politics and love. Meetings are social spaces, and our search for political direction is completely enmeshed in our search for intimate connection. But I'll let Dean tell you more about this. He wrote the book on it. First, I want to announce the official launch of CAW, the writer-worker collective that I belong to, along with Carla Joy Bergman, Danny Burleson, and Vicky Osterweil. It is a subscriber-based platform where we will share all of our projects, a Discord server, and offerings like writing workshops, book clubs, movie nights, as well as a zine and sticker library. If you sign up for free, you get access to the weekly newsletter, the advice column, our podcasts, and the zines and stickers. If you subscribe to a paid membership, you have full access to everything. There are various subscription tiers, but everyone who subscribes has the same access. Please go over to cawshinythings.com to check out what we're doing there, and join if you want. The Breakup Theory is a member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, which brings together important shows with news, analysis, report backs, and culture. Check it out at thechannelzeronetwork.com. And now, my conversation with the wonderful Dean Spade. Today, I am speaking with Dean Spade, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction to my listeners, but still, I want to say Dean, for me, has been an inspiring thinker and writer and activist. Most recent, the book that we're going to be talking about is Love in a Fucked Up World, but also Dean came out with a really important mutual aid book that was, prescient for what happened during COVID. And Dean has been part of the movements for a very long time. So I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome, Dean.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I was so excited when I heard that you were writing this book before it even came out, because it seemed like it intersected with things that I'd been thinking and writing about too. And it turned out in my reading that it did, but use a totally different way of getting at some of these, intersections. I wanted to start first, and you reflect on this in the book, but I was talking with a friend about how we have these allergies to self-help books, and you talk about it because they don't align with our politics, because they're capitalist, because they are too individualist or whatever. And in a way, it feels like you did the work for us to go through the things and take the stuff that actually we can frame, put within our framework. So I wanted to ask you just about that approach and what your own experience was in getting the book together.
Yeah. I mean, I've just been reading self-help books since I was a kid. They were some of the first books I ever read that were available to me, and also have just really needed to do a lot of emotional work to get by and recover from some things I went through when I was little, and be a person and deal with why are things hard in relationships, and why don't I have these different feelings and experiences, or not have these other different feelings and experiences. So I've just actually needed that stuff, but always felt, very conflicted about it. Because as you're saying, a lot of the framing and content of that genre is the exact opposite of what I believe in. It's how can you talk about sex and love and relationships and not put anything about patriarchy in there? Like, how can you talk about, work and anxiety and not talk about racial capitalism or whatever? It just feels wild. And it's as if it's just happening to you. And it's also like got a lot of false promises in it. Like, if you just do my program, you'll feel better. And yet there are nuggets of wisdom inside those books. It's almost the feeling that I have is like, sometimes the people who are writing them, who are doing, like, a lot of times they're very rigorous people. Like, they're like, a lot of them are like therapists who are like digging so deeply in with their clients and seeing lots and lots of people have a certain kind of suffering, and they're trying to name it. And I like wish for them that they could also know about like critiques of, patriarchy and capitalism and racism. Yeah. So I always read that stuff, and it was like this whole side of my life that felt sort of like a secret, not, it's like my close friends, we would talk about that stuff, but like, it just feels also it felt very stigmatized inside the movements we're in. Like, self-care is so neoliberal. And like, there's also that side of the kind of the masculinism, patriarchy in our movements. That's like, that stuff isn't important. So yeah, that's just been a huge part of my study. And I've just tried like, every form of like therapy and weird healing thing, like forever, because I had to, because of my being, affected by what I've been affected by in life, and wanting to like be able to show up and suffer less, basically, and connect with people and do the things I wanted to do that I could see, like how shame or things like that were holding me back, or like inability to grieve or whatever. And so about 10 years ago, I started to like really be like, I want to like take the things I like in some of these books and tools and rewrite them into our, like, what if you thought of this through a feminist lens, or through an anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-colonial lens? What if it was, those books are so ableist. They're so centered on like some kind of like idea of a normal, healthy mind body that's like so really limited. And that translation process is hard. And so I worked on the book for like 10 years, often feeling quite conflicted while I was working on, like, should I be doing this? Can I do this? And like, during that time, other things happened. Like, I wrote mutual aid, and so much has happened during that time. But yeah, it's been a really long journey. And one thing that I'm just noticing personally is that I spent so much time feeling like I shouldn't write this, and who am I to write this? And like being like having a lot of shame trips about it, and a lot of like fear around it, that now I actually feel kind of like relaxed. Like, it's okay if people don't like it. It's like, I already went through it all. You know what I mean? So it's really, in a way, it's like I'm coming out as like a person who has this whole other area of study, and that has been pretty private. And it's also kind of, it's all about sex and dating and stuff. So I'm also like, I'm coming out in some ways about that side of my life, which I haven't particularly shared publicly. And all of that just feels like kind of fine, which is really, really nice. Like, so far, I mean, maybe we'll see when something horrible happens, but I'm surprised to be like, just like curious whether people get anything out of it, and what, like what is in here. And also because I didn't talk about the project very much during the period that I was writing it, compared to my other work, where usually I'm talking the whole time with people and teaching whatever the same sets of ideas. It's like a real surprise. Like, what people will ask me about it has been really surprising and stuff, which is really fun.
Yeah, I get that, because, when I tried to write a book on anarchism, like, who the hell am I to say this? But people get something out of it. And I think that's always the thing. Like, you don't know what's going to reach someone, and it could just be one thing. I don't know. But just to say, all the people who in my life who've been reading your book are like, oh, it's coming at just the right time for me, and it's like picking me up. But one of the frameworks that you use in the book that I think is super important is that our interpersonal relationships are also part of the organizing we do. And often the ways that we don't think about how those are connected can cause a lot of harm and conflict, that splinters groups or puts up obstacles for what we want to do, which I think I agree with you. There's like, that's like anti-feminist perspective, like not thinking about these littler, quote unquote, littler things or daily life things as part of, political change. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about bridging the sort of individual relationships that are fundamentally part of how we organize, and then the larger picture of what this can teach us for, moving forward together.
Yeah. I mean, I think that our movements aren't anything except our relationships. Like, it's just like, that feels to me, the question of our lives is, can we build sufficiently bold collective action to defeat our opponents, who have like all of the infrastructure right now? They have all the money, they have all the guns, they have so much surveillance technology. Like, people are rightfully very intimidated by who we're up against. And so the only thing we have is all the people. And so if we can't do people-y stuff, if we can't move lots of people to put our bodies in the way of their projects, to coordinate clandestine networks to get people what they need. Like we can't coordinate with each other. We can't do anything. Like that's the only thing we have. And we see it all the time. I mean, I just think everyone in our movements for years and years, I've been doing all this like abolitionist work and work related to transformative justice and stuff. And everywhere I go, people are just like talking about the conflict in their groups, destroying their groups. Like that is what is happening. Like and sometimes it appears to be conflict about political positions, but it's usually underneath that about people having like emotional reactivity about how hard it is to disagree. Because of course, like I have plenty of friends who I have long-term political disagreements with that are like sources of learning and delight. But it's like what often happens is actually we're having reactivity because we felt left out in the group or because we felt like people didn't care about us or because I felt overworked or I felt controlled or like all these, it reminded me of the way I felt in my family, whatever it is, right? At school, like we're treating each other the way we treat each other at jobs, where I felt exploited, all these things that are like the part we don't have a lot of skillfulness around. And sometimes, that's all happening, of course, inside our political context. So also it's happening like, with our identity differences and stuff like that. But we kind of use political language to explain something where like the group ruptured and it was like a lot was going on that was about like a friend breakup or a roommate breakup or a sexual relationship or, like taking sides and people leave the movement, I think most often because they have unresolved, really painful conflict that happened. I think that's actually the main pattern in our movements is that people like enter, do some things when they're young and then leave. And even if they stay political in their identity and they write about it or they think about it or whatever for the rest of their lives, they don't organize anymore. And it's because there was some kind of painful rupture. And we don't talk about that. That's a terrible life story to be a common one for our movements. We really need people to be able to have a lifelong engagement and, build skills with each other and support each other. So yeah, it feels to me like this is central. And I think when we think about why this is a feminist position to care about the process through which we organize, not just the product, it's also like, we're just used to being at jobs where you just like are forced to like it's coercion in school and you just like work as hard as you can and are worked sort of to death by others. And like, it's all about the outcomes. And it's like, it's like, do whatever you have to do, stay up all night to get an A or like be, like work even though you're sick and at all your jobs, et cetera. Like that mode of being is also the way everybody acts in these unpaid groups that are doing like mutual aid projects or, whatever we're doing, like, in campaigns or whatever. Like, we still act like that towards each other. We make each other like workers, you know what I mean? And we do it to ourselves very intensely. And like all of that is just like really really hurting us. It's it's like if the way we're working on the project means that at the end of it we distrust each other more or we're more angry or we're more left out or whatever, then like we're not ready for like the long term next project, bigger risk, bigger trust needed. I've just really that just feels like the pattern. So it's like this relationship stuff, it always seems in a patriarchal capitalist culture like it's to the side, kind of like the home and family is to the side, and the main gig is like the paid wage labor, whatever. And of course, we know that like it's the whole undergirding of everything, and it's hard to even admit that to ourselves. I think.
Yeah, I mean, part of the relationship focus is like how you root those things out of your own behavior because they are, repeated without thinking so often. And like the people who are the most vocally anti-work tend to be the people who like can't stop working, I think. And another cliche that's like connected to what you're talking about, there's like, how the attempt to do an accountability process around some form of harm basically rips up community apart and no one can do anything together. Which, for me, it makes me wonder a lot about like we put this emphasis on abolition and with the idea that there's some kind of transformative justice on the other end of that or a way to do that. And that's how we practice in our immediate lives, this kind of approach to things. And yet I've almost never seen it work in a way where people feel okay about it. And more often there's like lingering things where people are like, for years, like, I don't want that person in that space. I won't be there if that person's there. And, or like, just feel like that didn't serve them in any way. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, since you've done so much work on that and thinking about it, I wonder what you're thinking, because I see younger people too, who have had a lot of harm, just like split off and do their own thing because they can't be heard or listened to. Right. And people weaponize accountability process to have control, usually to like exclude trans femmes, I think.
I think there's a few things happening. I mean, one thing is that because most people haven't, like, we still live in an anti-accountability, anti-feedback culture. So a lot of times we don't give any feedback to each other or use any of those good skills along the way with small things. We don't know how to say yes and no. We don't know how to tell somebody, hey, when you do that, it has its effect on me. So then we only have moments of accountability when it's like the blow up of the horrible thing. So that's, of course, a setup for it to not go well. I think that like one of the things that is, and that's not any one of our faults, but it's just culturally, of course, right? The way it looks is just, it just looks patterned in the society where we minimize most harm. And then a few people we like put on trial, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is that people expect accountability processes to be like court-like. I think even
Right.
unconsciously, it's like, I want someone to come in here and find facts and say that I was right. And so no one's satisfied by them, right? And also we expect accountability processes to completely resolve a situation that's, of course, like the entire context of like why someone is hurting people is like, 3 or 4 people joining a team to support that person to stop harming probably can't resolve like their long-term housing issues, their long-term lack of access to healthcare, the trauma they've experienced in their life. Like, it's like, no, right? So the expectations people have are really, really high about accountability processes. My expectation about these processes are like, did no one go to jail? Did anyone support the survivor and listen to that person's experience at all? Did they get any help? Did anyone support the person who did harm or people who did harm to have more of what they need so they're less likely to do that harm again? Like, at all, because that's an improvement over what our current systems do. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, of course, I just see this everywhere. I see people in our movements, we blame ourselves for the conditions. And we're like, why didn't our mutual aid project solve all of that? Why didn't our accountability process? And it's like, part of it, we have to just grieve how bad things are, how low the baseline of our interventions needs to be, especially around interpersonal stuff, because we are just seeing like the tip of the iceberg in those processes and all of the other things that are causing that dynamic and causing it to never feel like, yeah, like we're never gonna be able to undo that the harm happened. Like, we just can't. So that's the
Right.
harm probably that actually disrupted the community, not the accountability process, right? But it feels to people like I tried something and it didn't work. And that to me is, it's really painful. And I don't want to deny that feeling. It's like a deeper level of being like, wow, how messed up things are and how humble our attempts have to be and how deeply we have to grieve that we didn't get what we needed and that we like are consistently not getting what we need in this community. And I think what happens a lot is we blame the people closest to us instead of the broader conditions. So then it becomes extra divisive. It's like, I need to find like my system needs to find a way to make it like Shuli's fault that this whole thing is like unsatisfiable. I don't know. I think it's really transformative justice needs to be understood by more people as not just the accountability processes, but all the preventative work. It's like,
Right.
what would we do to create parties and scenes and art projects and collaborations and public spaces that were where people gave more direct feedback, where people had more access to saying yes and no to each other, where we intervened in smaller forms of harm before it's the big ones. Like, that's where the gold really is for this. And instead, the most visible thing right now is like the really severe harm happened and people can't solve that, of course, but I don't think that, I think that also the efforts that do happen are more meaningful than people are willing. They may be disappointing, but it's so good that they happened rather than nothing happening or rather than the cops happening. You know what I mean? Like, we're digging ourselves out of a terrible hole of like harm minimization and extreme punishment and exile. So like, it's a long haul out of there.
Yeah, I think it's often just overlooked how important it is to be heard, and that often in the accountability processes that we try replay that idea of like ignoring the victim or the person who's harmed and isolating, and how much harm can be isolating from people. But also some of what you were talking about, I've been thinking about how we are so stuck in the top down perspective of things. So even thinking about like creating a radical space, I've seen so many people enter into that space assuming that the organizers of that space are in control of everything else that's going on. And then if they have a grievance or whatever, they blame the organizers, or they want the organizers to intervene in a kind of authoritarian way to stop that. And there's this expectation, which I don't know if you think this is related, that like you can go into a place that will cater completely to whatever your needs are or your expectations or desires are.
Yeah, I think this is from living in an institutionalized society which I think is even more than it was 20 years ago, and where we're told that we're disempowered and we need to appeal to authority figures to get what we need. And of course, all the systems of authority are not giving people what they need. But that story causes people it's very individualizing. It's like, instead of being like, it's fucked up here at the school, let's have the students all organize. It's like, no, we're pushed to be like, no, I need to get an individual medical diagnosis, and then I need to individually engage with the school as somebody seeking accommodation. It's like, it's like the conditions get lost. There's a lot of like individuation of our suffering in these systems, or I need to, as an individual worker, seek individual redress. And so part of what happens with that is like, it is very disempowering to be an individual, right? Compared to being part of a collective. And it's very disempowering to have to beg for support rather than being able to fight for it with others. And people it's a whole unconscious setting. And also we live in a society where we've been told that we can find power by articulating ourselves as the victim, that the best position. And so I see this in a couple of ways. Like, one thing is like, people enter groups. Like, I'm in some mutual aid group where nobody's paid, everybody's scrappy, but it already exists when I get there. Like, I think if I start it with people, then I'm not going to institutionalize it. But if it already exists when I get there, I'm like, this place didn't deliver to me all of the things I needed, and it's fucked up. Instead of like, oh, there's some things missing here, I'm going to organize with others to make them happen here, which might even mean having to confront other people in the group and be like, hey, we're not doing this right, or this is leaving people like me out, or whatever. Like, there's a kind of disempowerment that's then like, I'm going to go online and call out the group. This is another appeal to authority. I want the world of online, whoever that amorphous being is, to find the facts that I was the victim. And that can become an entire emotional investment. And the way I see this, like, one way I see this is people going with their complaint to public posts on the internet before ever actually talking directly with the people that they are working with, or that like they're trying to make community with. Like, there's a kind of like go to shame, blame, and vengeance, because it feels like the only place of power in our society is the place of being the one who's judged to be the victim by somebody, by either the authority figures or by like the internet as a whole, or whatever it is. All of that is happening unconsciously. Like, there's no blame or shame in this. Like, all of us are caught up in these ways of thinking, and it just affects, like, it's affecting groups so much. And so part of it, I think what this book is about, is just even noticing when we are having emotional activation, just noticing our emotions, so that I can be like, right now, I feel like I want attention, or right now I feel aggrieved, or whatever. And I'm telling a whole story about Shuli or about this group that we're in together. And can I even be like, Dean, you're scared right now, or you're sad, or this reminds you of when you were left out in a prior situation, so that I could then potentially talk to friends and be like, is it the right thing to do to talk to Shuli directly, or is the right thing to do to post about Shuli, or is the right thing to do to like leave the group in a huff, or to bring a proposal to the group, or try to get more of my friends to join the group with me, like so that I have some more choice, instead of like having a reactive blow up that's actually leaves me more isolated. Like, I'm less connected now to you and the group. Like, it's like everyone's like not getting what they need out of this pattern of like of reactivity that's not, it doesn't belong to any of us. And I know none of us are to blame for it. It's the cultural story about how to get safe,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, as you point out, that a lot of this comes down to the fact that we don't think in the first place, or in the second place, or whatever, that the solution to something is to come together and collaborate or collectivize, even though that's like supposedly a tenet of a lot of our like political beliefs.
It's the only thing we have.
Yeah.
Literally is that. And yet we are like anything but that.
Right. I gotta solve it. I mean, this is literally the idea behind the project I'm now in, CAW, which is like, oh, we're all sitting here as writers, like chasing contracts and stuff. I'm like, why wouldn't we collectivize it? Like, that seems like no one had ever thought of it. I mean, obviously some people, but I was like, that is such a good idea. Yeah. And then also that I think a lot of people in whatever groups and stuff they form aren't explicit about what they're wanting in that, what they want to get out of it, what's the overlap between the work that's being done and the social and relationship needs that are met within that. Like, what do we do if there's a problem, and how do we break up if it doesn't work?
Yeah. And I'm worried that I think I've talked to, like, I think one thing that happens is people go to, you don't have to like people that you're organized with, or maybe we should have a rule in our group that that people don't have sex in this group, or that people have to tell each other if they're having sex, so these things don't get in the way. And I'm like, actually, what if instead we assumed we are all actually our full social beings, and not try to make the group more professional and like exclude these things, but instead be like, yeah, these things are going to happen in the group. How do we be skillful? How do we have shared values about what's ethical? in that. So like, how do we support each other to learn new ways of being as friends, lovers, collaborators, so that we cultivate those skills instead of being like, oh, we don't have these skills and it ruins the group. Let's try to exclude this and become like robots who don't need social things. Like to me, that like I've been in a lot of groups where there's a lot of like people coming out of prison and joining the group, and there's also people who've never been in prison in the group. A lot of times people coming out of prison like have like major social needs. Like like they might be learning how to be social on the outside again.
Mm-hmm.
They might be in a lot of crisis around housing, work, just like lots of adaptation stuff. Sometimes people who've been in men's prisons for a long time are like learning a lot about like feminism and gender and like being in more mixed gender spaces than they had been in, like kind of
Right.
what the norms are, and kind of tripping over some things that sometimes whatever. And like just being like, this is part of what this group does. This is not separate from this group's abolitionist work. Like, right. And then do we need to, instead of trying to get all that done in our 90-minute meeting with our full agenda, have some additional times when we meet and do some of that social stuff, or some of that grief stuff, or some of that bonding stuff, or some of that like support stuff. Like instead of being like, everyone come to the 90-minute meeting and be normal, or whatever,
Yeah.
like be ready to be professional and get the newsletter out. Like it's like, this is ridiculous. And also right now, like I mean, I don't know if you're experiencing this, but like everyone is not well right now. Like it is
Yeah.
really fucking scary out here. And people are like, my friends are being dicks. And I'm like, give them a little credit. Like everyone's unwell. Like your friends are going to whatever the coping mechanisms are. Are they ghosting on you right now? That, yes, give them direct feedback, be like, hey, I miss you or whatever. But like, let's just imagine that people are really losing it, whether they're telling you that or not. Like, give them a little space.
I mean, that's sort of like what you were saying. Like, people are so conflict averse that they won't approach someone to talk about how they feel or a kind of behavior or action that affected them in some way. And it's so funny because another way that conflicts with, our supposed political ideas is like, we're like direct action, right? But that won't extend to the possibility of just like saying, hey, when you did this, it made me feel this way. What were you thinking? Like, why did you do that? Can we like talk it out?
I
And on
think that
both sides too, because people feel attacked, right? And get defensive
yeah, the
immediately.
lack of skills on receiving feedback. I mean, I think people are just actually overall avoidant. Like the number of people I know who like don't want to live with roommates because the fear of conflict around the dishes, like the fear of having to just like, it's like we become like a completely antisocial, society in which everyone's afraid of other people. And the result of that is that everyone's isolated, alone, and spending so much extra money to live in this isolation, and then also all their time. It's so much harder to do your own social reproduction of your life if you do everything by yourself, right? Like if you have to deal with every house problem and cook every meal and do all the groceries and like and have nobody else doing that, like collectivizing that social reproduction work would make so many people able to do more movement work who are just like, I don't know, I have to work all the time and my life just takes me all my, like that to me is a signal. Like it's like the fear of conflict is guiding like an enormous amount of kind of retreat from others. Like people are afraid of other people. And that is, again, no blame, no shame. But like if we identify that in ourselves, there is room to like work on that. To like, I want to learn to connect. And for me, I think movement work can be a space where people can like try out like being around people who aren't like them and like making decisions with others. And sometimes it's bumpy and seeing what's like to not get my own way, but to still want the group to move forward. And like all these skills that we don't have are like, oh, finding out that like the way I do this thing bugs other people. I never thought about it before. And it's not the end of the world. And I don't have to hate myself for it or tell them they're wrong. I can just be like, I'm going to work on that. Thank you.
Yeah. The first time I lived alone was getting out of an abusive relationship. So at that moment, it felt really important. And so the thing that I learned from that was that I needed space to not be seen, to like not
Yeah.
be seen by other people. And then actually connecting through organizing from that space was actually so fulfilling, because then I started being able to delineate in my head. And this is like a practice that for me is ongoing, when I need alone time, right? And when I am open to social time. And then also like, what's my role in different groups? Like the encampment, for example, is I think a really good example of people trying to figure this out. The one that I was most involved in didn't want to do the things I wanted to do. And I was like, okay, but I didn't like leave. I was just like, I will do other things within this group to like support them to the
Yeah.
point that I feel, I want to be involved, without trying to like take it over or be like, fuck these people. They don't know what they're doing. So I don't know. There's like, I'm not
Yeah.
trying to necessarily defend living alone,
Oh
but
no, I had to live alone too. I mean,
yeah,
I was in foster care when I was a kid, and the experience, and it's just what you said, being able to not be seen, being able to not feel scrutinized, being like, I had to build a self basically. And
yeah,
I think, yeah, it's like there's no one single answer, but there's something about the tendency that I do think the fear of going to a meeting. Like I just noticed that people are like, I'm afraid to like just go to there's people doing the thing I care about and I'm afraid to go to it. Or
yeah,
to go to there's people doing a kind of dancing I want to do or doing kind of art I want to do. And I just can't get myself to go. That to me feels like a symptom of just the society as a whole being like socially anxious and avoidant. And then you don't, because the thing you're describing is so beautiful, the process by which you learned what your yes and no was about other people and that
yeah,
you learned something about like consent and boundaries. Like that's also what living alone helped me with. I was like, oh, what is like when I actually have any downtime and don't feel on? And then I learned how
right,
to be like, can I sometimes not feel on even when I'm with others? Like, what is it that and for me, that's all shame stuff. Like, what is it
right,
I'm hiding? What is it like, what's the over efforting I'm doing when I'm with other people that's about how I'm not okay or I'm afraid they'll see me, like I mean, it's a lifelong process, but like learning how to be that, like, that's such a beautiful arc that includes for a lot of us like getting enough solitude. Like solitude is just missing in the society. I
yeah,
am curious about how people who live in societies where almost nobody lives alone get solitude. I think there are ways, and I think that's
yeah,
something juicy for us to all think about as we head further into collapse. And I think we're going to need to rely on each other more and more. And like, maybe we won't have all the space we want. Like, can we? Like, I think most people just don't have a relationship to solitude practice in a society
yeah.
that's like you should constantly be listening to a podcast or playing a video game or like no downtime in your mind and spirit between like receiving stimulation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's worsened, from COVID because of the isolation and also the fear of being in space with people, which is real. And then that made us more dependent on our devices, not just because it's isolating and individualistic, but it's like where people started doing their organizing, like it transferred to like Signal.
Right.
And I think the like Signal etiquette or not etiquette, the like behavior that Signal produces is like so destructive to the things that we
Mm.
actually want to do and then stands in place for it. So I mean,
Will
I
you say more
personally,
about what that behavior has looked like to you?
well, one thing is like individually, I start having too many groups that I'm involved in because it doesn't feel like the same commitment to like going to these meetings, right? And then I get totally overwhelmed by the things to the point that I can't do anything because there's too much. And then also like online commenting, there's the kind of pseudo anonymity that happens with it, especially in big groups. So people can be nasty, right?
Mm.
And I feel like I hate texting, and I feel like the tone can never be clearly conveyed. And for me, I have a bias of like a negative bias of reading text.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, it's like interpersonal relationships. We project a lot. So I think there's so much misunderstanding that
Yeah.
happens through that, which can really provoke nasty behavior. So all of
I
these
think
things for me.
also people can't tell if decisions have been made. I think a lot when Signal is happening, like people will be like, I thought that at the meeting we said this, but then one person on Signal said this. And so now I can't, like, there's a kind of, and most groups don't have a clear decision making. Like if you start doing stuff together spontaneously, you often haven't had a conversation about like, how do we know if a decision got made? And it's kind of working well for the first few weeks or the first few months. And then you're like, suddenly it starts to get harder. And you're like, oh, we actually don't know if when somebody says this on Signal, it undoes it or whether like how we can tell if two or three people said, if or some people said nothing. So I feel like we are animals and I've heard that like 90% of our communication is nonverbal. So
Mhm.
the main ways that we would in a meeting or space know that we're building trust and that we wanted to do the action or the way we'd be like, oh wow, like that person they've got a look on their face like they're not happy with it. Someone's going to say like, hey, have we lost you? Like actually check in with each other in a way that's more holistic and meets different people's communication styles and emotional settings. Like all of that's missing when we're just on Signal. And I think people
Right.
do default to paranoid reading of each other and to kind of defended, like, if I don't love the way that you wrote that, now I'm like, oh, well, Shuli's a blah, blah, blah. And I'm like using political language to talk about my feeling of fear, basically, or
Yeah.
alienation. Or I already am approaching the group like, oh, I know it has Dean in it and he's an academic. So this group is going to be full of snobs or, whatever. Everyone's just got all this secret stuff going on in our heads. Or my ex is in this group and blah, blah, blah. Everyone likes her, not me, and whatever, like just like that kind of stuff. when I think that being in person, at least sometimes when that's possible, or even on Zoom and seeing each other, anything like adding any more connection can help us overcome that. And so going to the point of all text is very, 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 very hard.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I've seen with like, then there's like the breakout group that like makes decisions. And then suddenly is like telling everyone what they need to do. I hate getting the messages like all out. We need bodies at whatever. And then you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. You want this to happen immediately.
Yeah,
Like,
who's calling for this? Like, how many people decided this? Like, was it 2 people last night in their bedroom, or did like this come from a giant coalition? I can't tell.
right. I want to make sure that we talk about like personal, quote unquote, like not separating this, but like less out or more outside of the organizing experience, because I think this is so important. And for me, it is also where it all comes from, and why we're doing this is to have better relationships, and a lot of the learning process of our life is. I mean, that's one of the things I thought about in your book is like, and you talk about is how much of the the internal problems that we have that plague us and we repeat even though we can sometimes know about them, we can work out in relationship if you have a relationship that can hold that. And I don't think a lot of people see that or believe that or find that really the person that they can do things like that with.
Yeah,
um
I hear people say all the time, I hate people. It's like people are mostly hard for me, or people what I hear inside that is like, I'm afraid of conflict. I've been disappointed by others. I'm exhausted by putting on a mask of whoever I think I'm supposed to be when I'm in social groups. There's so many things inside that. And what you're describing is like, what's it like when we connect with people and decide to like acknowledge if we decide to commit to our friendship with each other and be like, hey, Shuli, I felt left out when you didn't invite me to dinner with others, or I I noticed you're not texting me as much this month and I miss you, but I know that you're going through stuff. But, like, what if we actually are like, oh, I'm having a shame reaction. It just gave a talk. Will you be with me? Like, what if we actually are vulnerable with other people? It's like all the wounding is there. So also the potential for having reparative experiences and changing our internal stories about people is there. Like finding out, like, I had this experience once that I just coming back to me right now where I got like attacked on a bus and someone hit me in the head, and like it was really scary. I got a concussion. And afterwards, like my friend Craig like immediately flew to the city I was living in and stayed with me until another friend could come. And it was like the number of mini experiences I had with Craig and with the next person who came were just like, it was like I let in care for the first time in my life in a certain kind of way. Like a new level of believing I could be cared for happened. You know what I mean? I
yeah.
want everyone to, like, every crisis, every illness, every hard day, like, could be an opportunity for us to like find out that other people are with us or listen to us, or that when we didn't feel heard, it can be, or when, that like that the harmful moments there can be a meaningful apology and forgiveness, like things that most of us have never experienced. Relationships with family and jobs and everything are just like frayed and awful, and you have to just lie about what's happening for you or hide. And I just think like this thing is available. I think some people, it's interesting to just ask ourselves, where have we tasted it? Like, did it happen? I think for a lot of people, it's happened in friendship. I think that's like that's the relationship with the like least coercion sometimes. Like,
Hmm.
sexual relationships have more coercion. There's all this meaning in our culture, blood family, for God's sake, jobs, whatever. But there's something that can happen in friendship where it's like, I knew there was a more consensual thing between us. And of course, lots of friendships, there's abuse and other things happen. But like, I do think that's a space where some people might be like, yeah, there was a time where I said, I really don't want to eat that tonight. And my friend was like, yeah, okay, we don't have to. Instead of being like with them on a date, I'm going to pretend I like this food that I don't like or whatever, like people, like, where did you get to flex your beingness and feel acceptable? Or like you could be like, cry in front of this person, or, my house is a mess and you're coming over anyway, or whatever, just like these are small things, but in our society in which everyone's supposed to look like a fucking movie star, and like, no one's supposed to age and no one's supposed to get sick. And it's a big deal to be like, where was I ever vulnerable with another?
Yeah, I mean, the experience of illness is really a place where I found that, like, that story that you just told with Craig. I mean, that's so beautiful because it's really hard for us to ask for help, even if we love giving care and help to people. And often I see that, like I said, with the anti-work person working too hard, is like people who see themselves as caregivers will never ask for help. And so if you have someone in your life who just steps in when they know you need help, that can maybe help you learn to ask for it. And I think that like a lot of organizers, anarchists, whatever, have this experience collectively. Like we talk always about how in a crisis, mutual aid just like spontaneously happens, right? People are like, we're going to figure this out, and no one needs to ask for it. Or like in the streets, right? People have experienced during like facing off with the cops or whatever, that you'll get someone's back who you don't even know, right? And people will come together. But like in the interpersonal relationships, it's so hard to say what you want and even just like allow people to respond to that and help you. I think that particularly for illness, like people always offer me stuff when I'm not feeling well and when I'm doing treatments, and I'll always say no. Like I'm always like, I got it, I got this.
And
It's
then it can
weird.
be so useful just to be like, I'm going to try to say one yes in the month of March. Like, I think how can we give ourselves like really tiny, opportunities to be like, I'm really hiding here, or I'm really avoiding care here, or I'm really like, what you were just saying too brought up for me, like one skill I talk about in the book a bit is like learning how to be with other people when they're having strong feelings. Most of us, when other people are having strong feelings around us, they're having a breakup, or they had a loss in their life, someone died. People just get, or they're stressed out at work, or they're having a fight at work, something. People get like, either I shut down, like I can't handle this person so upset in front of me, or I like overly join them. I'm like, yeah, let's get them. Let's destroy your ex. Let's do a campaign and make everyone in the community hate them. Or I try to give them advice to shut them up. That's like a really common, like you should quit that job or whatever. And most people just want, that sounds really hard. If all of us could practice that a little bit, notice my own body. Am I afraid of how hard it is for you? Can I feel, wow, that sounds really hard.
Yeah,
That's so unfair. I
yeah,
hate that's happening to you. The other thing about that is people I know who are experiencing major loss, grief, or illness, others avoid the topic.
right.
So it's okay to be like, I'm not going to like ask probing questions about someone's illness or treatment I want to make sure to give them space to like, I don't feel like talking about that because I have to talk about that too much all the time to the doctor
Hmm.
or to my family, whatever. But like, I want to be not like when I see somebody who I know has just lost their parent or their pet, I want to not be like afraid of them because I'm afraid of grief. I want to be
Yeah,
like, I just more texts, more asking when you talk to that person or see them, like, how is that for you? Do you want to talk about that? I've been thinking about you. Like, just, not interrogation, but just like this thing that you're going through is not something you have to put away to be with me. I really
yeah,
think that we're not good at that. I wish I
right.
talked
No,
about that in
it's
the
like
book. I didn't.
that's like the taint. Well, we talked a little bit about what I'm about to say with Connor. It's like the taint of death in a way that like illness or loss feels like it's contagious in a way. I think that drives people away, and we saw that with COVID. I think like historically with AIDS, like there's this attempt to kind of distance yourself from people who are having something that you're scared of yourself.
Yeah, literally, your parent died, my parent could die. Your pet died, my pet might die. I literally see that people are freeze up around, and that's part of our bigger overall work of being with impermanence and death. I mean, just like we're terrible at that. And that's, capitalism wants us to think we could live forever if we just bought the right products. And, it's like, what is it really like to just be like, yeah, we're all going to definitely die. And everyone we love is going to die. We're going to spend our lives losing each other and living through horrible ecological disasters. Now, what do I want to be like? It
Yeah, we
really
take this.
shifts the needle.
Yeah, we like have this historical view. This is like the top-down thing, and it can obscure that we are just now, right? And we need to act right now. But so the thing you said about people in like the kind of heightened states is connected with the people who've harmed. Like people want to be heard, and it's hard to listen to someone and not try to solve a problem or take it personally and just hear. And I mean, this is something you learn also kind of practically about treating anxiety or OCD, right? Like if you jump in someone's anxiety, you're not going to solve that. And then you can get really annoyed and resentful that you're not helping them get through it. And from the outside, it's like, this isn't a problem. There's nothing here, right? Like it doesn't help the person. All you can really do is say, that's so hard. I'm sorry that like you're having that experience or you're stuck, because you need to let it pass, right? You need to like give them space to let it pass and not hold them in it out from the outside too. This leads me to another thought that I'm constantly talking about and thinking about. So, like, I think one of the scary prospects of anarchism is that, and how this is very different from leftism, that when you're thinking as an anarchist that you have to be willing a world where everyone doesn't agree and will want different things, and it's not one universal, world that everyone participates in the same way, but there will be like different people can follow different paths. And I find that to be translated into relationships and to what I've learned in interpersonal relationships. So, like, how so much of what we do is project feelings onto other people, our intentions onto other people. And so the experience ends up being like these two parallel worlds or truths that are like butting up against each other. And like you have to get to the place where you can say these two things coexist and they don't have to be in conflict with each other. Like we can have two truths, two stories that don't like erase your own like my story erases your experience or vice versa. And I think a lot of fights end up being about that.
Yeah.
And for me, like part of the work is to be like, how do I accept that? Right? Like here's someone, even if they're pointing their finger at me, and be like, I'm not actually the cause of this emotion. And my experience of that didn't happen isn't going to help them get out of it, right? And the anger response won't help either. This is something I see you talk about in the book in a way that I find really helpful. Like, a lot of the book made me really reflective on my own experience. I don't know what you think about this idea of like these kind of conflicting truths or worlds at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, we do not know other people's interiority, and it is shockingly different from ours. And there are also patterns of reactivity that we could notice that are often dances. Like I'm feeling avoidant and you're feeling anxious, or whatever. It was often a dance you do with another person. I'm going to pursue you, you're going to distance, and then you're going to pursue me, and I'm going to distance, and we're never going to meet. We can notice like cultural patterns produced by our shared context, but also people's interiority is really like, could we be curious about it? And part of what happens, like I think with especially with romantic relationships, is people they stoke romantic relationships stoke a lot of intense fear for people and insecurity, and then they get rigid. I'm like, Shuli didn't call me back. That's fucked up. Shuli didn't tell me about that other date. And it's like, actually what happened was that like Shuli like has this kind of preference about sharing information, and Dean has this kind of preference, and like we've got to find out from each other, or like I think it's like so offensive when someone does this or that, and Shuli's like, oh, I like it when people do that. Why would we know that? And the feeling scape I'm on has very little to do with the person in front of me, especially I think if they are my romantic interest. Like that is when I really have lost the thread of like who that person is. And I'm very deep in my own, I'm deep in an emotional process that is not bad, but it's a lot of projection. So if I want to like, a lot of the conflict comes because people are full of fear. It's like, that's when I'm going to like dig in and be like, my view, if you don't see my view, then you're hurting me, or you're bad. And total loss of curiosity. Like, how could we do this together given that we're different? Like that, what a fun question. She really likes this, Dean likes this, whatever, Instead it's like, I'm not safe because you don't want to do it this way. We get really into like these big words, right? And it's like, okay, how could we honor the feelings? Like, wow, I'm having a huge fear reaction, Shuli. Like, would you be willing to talk to me about it? And it's the reaction is telling me it's about you, but it's actually about me or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I think so much of the book is just noticing I'm having a big reaction. It's telling me a story about myself and others. Can I slow down and experience that?
The other structure that's a huge part of your book is this idea of the romance myth and the way that positions us towards other people, and connecting that to what you were just saying. Things that were helpful for me in this book were the distinction you make between abandonment and engulfment. Engulfment for me was like a really helpful word. And then the way that you talk about, a lot of the trauma that comes out in relationship, particularly romantic relationship, it relates back to childhood experiences. And you talk about it in terms of there was a threat, an existential threat when you were a child. And right now it's not an existential threat in your relationship, but it feels like one. Can you expand a little bit on this?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that is the thing. It's like, I mean, yeah. So we've got the cultural romance myth that's telling us that this is the most important relationship, that if you don't have this relationship, you're bad or undesirable, that like what happens here is going to be more important than anywhere else. Like that's this whole cultural context that's like such a setup, right? Like because actually all of our relationships are important, and also like we're told this one's going to be forever. And that it's based on like, I think that pattern where like in patriarchy, where you're supposed to like be in a blood family, and then like, you know, maybe during adolescence you have some friends, and then you go into a new blood family through your marriage, and like that's like it's confinement. I mean, you know what I mean? And of course, that's not the world we're living in now. Like people can have more relationships than that, and we don't. But that model is still like that's the important relationship. So all of that's hanging on top of anyone who's going on a date or fucking. You know, like all of that is in the air. And even if I was like, you know, even though we met on Scruff, and I'm like, we're just gonna do this one thing, and I just want to like, let's just have this one cute scene. It's still in the air. We still should know it's in the minds of everyone we connect with. It's around, right? And then there's the other piece, like you're talking about the piece where I think because of the nature of the romance myth and various things about our psychology, we often go into kind of like what some people call like a primal panic about these relationships. This is when you're like, the person didn't text me back and I feel like I'm going to die, but it's just a text from someone I met 2 weeks ago. What is going on here? Or, you know, this kind of high stakesness relates to both that romance myth narrative and the fact that for one reason or another, people tend to more concentratedly play out these childhood wounds in sexual and romantic relationships. It also happens in other relationships. Absolutely. Like you can project on your boss that they're your dad, and you can do this with your friend. Like absolutely. And some of us feel fear of engulfment and fear of abandonment like all over our lives, but it's often extra concentrated in the realm of romance. So then like you telling me you prefer me to text you more makes me want to like run screaming, or you know, not texting me back makes me think I'm going to die. Like these reactions are as if this is life and death. And that experience, that idea that I am like, that's so far from this reality, right? Like in reality, like most of the people I date or most, you know, like it's not, it's like there are some exceptions. There are people who have like true life and death dependency on a caregiver who's a lover. That does happen to some people, but for most people, this is an emotional reaction that we're not aware is happening and can lead to blame. Like, well, Shuli's a flake, and I'm telling everyone in the community, Shuli was terrible to date and didn't text me, or, you know, Shuli was so needy, or whatever these narratives we have about each other that are just like totally missing, like what was happening to me. I was feeling activated, you know? And if I can know that, I can get support from friends about it. I can ask whether like, how do I want to hold, like maybe you know, what I've done sometimes, I'm like, maybe I want boundaries about how much I text with people so that I, you know, maybe what do I need? I mean, there was a period where I was doing a lot of like recovery work around my sex and love life, you know, maybe like 15 years ago. And I created like, I was just like, I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to have curfews for myself. I would like, I met someone who was very interested in it. I was like, I'm going to have some curfews. I'm going to only see this person a certain amount. I'm going to like delay sex, which I had never done. I was just like, I'm going to just try some stuff to see if I can have a different pattern. Like, I'm so sick of my reactive pattern. And just like being like, this is what shakes me loose from just being on this train that kind of has nothing to do with current reality. And it's all about, you know, historical reactions and cultural expectations. Like, I want freedom. I want to respond to what's really here. And that, I think that that's very hard for most of us. And then also, do I want to, within that, at that time period, I told the person I was dating that I was doing this. I was like,
Right.
I'm trying, and that was really, and that, sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't want to overshare with someone you're just meeting or whatever, but it was like, that felt really good to just be like, this is what I'm about right now. And like, that felt like a kind of transparency that I was like, I'm trying something that's some artificial edges to me a little bit. It's not what I would naturally do. And actually, I feel like I want to depart from my habits and reactions. And that felt really like, just honest, you know, about the engagement.
Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, it's like putting a structure on something. And like the romance myth imagines this eternity, right, that you're claiming.
Going to Love Island with everyone. That's the other thing. That's so disruptive to our communities. People meet someone and they just like disappear, or they change all their values to the values of the new date, or like, I mean, that is so disruptive. They just ditching our friends because that's the most important relationship is so bad for our groups and for our friend circles. And so even just like, I have in the book a dating plan tool. It's like just being like, what have I done in the past that didn't work well for me? And then like, what if I tried to do it a little differently and actually explicitly said that and talked to a friend about it? Like, what about just putting some more intention here instead of just being like, oh, I got swept off my feet. And then suddenly I'd moved to Kansas with this person for their job. And now I don't have any friends. And like, what if instead I was like, I've moved to Kansas several times for people, and it often ended up a little iffy. This
Yeah.
time I think I'll make like just trying to take from what we've learned.
I mean, that also like leads to the experience of disappointment because, the falling in love period, the honeymoon period, as they say, is so beautiful and intense, and like everyone
Chemical.
should experience it if they can or want, but it can't last. It literally cannot last. And then you go into this like day to day thing, and you like want to hold up someone to the experience where you would stop everything or move to Kansas for them. And yeah, that's just not sustainable. And it's really
Yeah.
hard, I think, to like keep that memory and the beauty of it in a relationship and then live in the now,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I mean, there's a couple of things there too. Like one part of that is the fact that when we project at the beginning that the person's like so amazing and they're going to meet all of our needs, unconsciously we're like, I'm going to get the love I didn't get as a
Right.
child, or in like, right. And then inevitably that person, you can't put it on the perfect date every date, or you're right, your life has more ordinariness in it at some point, or that person, it turns out, just like sometimes disappoints you, like sometimes they're late, or they don't say the perfect thing, they don't read your mind, or whatever, and that then can become like a vengeful, resentful, like you disappointed me, you lied to me, when really it was like your own projections that were so high, and then they are having like proportionally upset disappointment. That's like, again, just like like loving ourselves, like, oh wow, I'm disappointed, oh wow, I'm scared that this means they don't like me as much as I thought they did, whatever, like just being with ourselves instead of just like going after them, and being like, I think so many like marriages are just these like resentment contests of resentment, instead of contests of generosity, which is what we want relationships to be. Oh, the other piece is also like asking ourselves, why do the relationships domesticate in the ways they do? Like, I mean, I think that's a question. Like, do we? I do think that like new relationship energy does come to an end, and that it's important to like know the impermanence of that. But also, do we hasten that with a relationship escalator? Do we
Right.
like get so obsessed with finding security that we lose like magic and feral wildness in our connections, because we're just like, oh my God, I have to pin this person down.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's through monogamy or through living together. But I'm just like, what would it be like to be like, oh, I'm going to like retain some of the discomfort of a non-domesticated relationship, if that's what you want. But I feel like most people don't even know that's on the menu, because there's just such a strong, like, I must pin this down.
Right. And I think like that's related to another problem in relationships that can really lead to conflict, is that you want to pin someone down. You want to be like, I know this person, that's who they are. And then you can't allow them to change. Right. And it seems like the successful relationship, I think friendship or love relationship, is allowing someone to become a different person without containing them in the narrative like your family would do, and allow them to want different things, than they said they wanted a little while ago or
Yeah, we're
whatever.
all constantly changing. I mean, that is like all relationships change, all people change. It's very painful. And we live in a society that tries to say that things are fixed. It wants to be like, the United States has always existed and will always exist, and whiteness is fixed, and everything, gender is fixed. And the whole story of society is about containment and confinement. And in reality, everything is wild and changing, and like people are changing. And the best thing I can do as your lover or friend is be like, oh, Shuli, you're interested in that now? Wonderful. And even I'm like, oh, that might mean Shuli will move, or that might mean Shuli will give a lot of attention to something. Like, like Shuli has a new friend, a new best friend. Can I be with that? And that can include being sad. I miss seeing Shuli every Friday, because now some of Shuli's Shabbats are with another friend, whatever,
Yeah.
like, but can I like just be with what's happening, instead of like trying to stop it and lock it down and blame somebody and shame myself? And that's just like where we go. It's so sad.
And we can't think outside the idea of this like linear like line of development and like increasing closeness, or rather than think that they're rhythms of relationships. And this is something I practice a lot because so many of my friends don't live in the same place, and so you rely on text. You're like, we don't respond to each other immediately. There's a rhythm when we're actually having a conversation right now, and then when we're just like, there's days between. And I think that's true in real life. Like someone can go do something for a while and come back to you and want to hang out with you, and you have to find a way to live in that in between without getting mad at them about
And
it.
part of that is having a big support system. I really think most people don't have enough people in their lives. And especially right now, when everybody is really going through it and is going to be really going through it for the rest of our lives. We're just like entering, new levels of the poly crisis. I need to be able to be like, I need support. I called Shuli, didn't get a message back. I called Vicky. Vicky's not available. I called Craig, and it maybe take 5 calls because everyone's taking care of a dying person, or everyone's, going through mental health crisis, or, their best friend just got out of prison and they're trying to support, like whatever, right? Like we all just need bigger support systems than we have. A lot of people just have their date or just have like a family member or some family members who are also don't treat them well or something, like it's just like, we need a lot. And one thing I think is helpful, I have friends where I'm like, we communicate on this, in this app, we do video messaging, and we know there's no pressure with time. And that if anything is time sensitive, it'll be texted. Or like we make some agreements so that we don't disappoint each other all the time. Or like we acknowledge like one person's really bad at texting. They won't text back. And we all already agree to know that about them and to tell them when it's really important. Like just like letting people be different from each other, but also like kind of bringing it to the surface can make it feel less conflicty. Like I feel less abandoned if we've already agreed that we know that when you don't text me back, it doesn't mean anything. If I'm having fear of abandonment in the friendship,
I mean, this thing about the the support system, I mean, this is like maybe what is most important right now as like things are crumbling in a way that we don't want and we don't know. That like the basic thing you can do is connect with people around you and figure out how do we care for each other when shit goes down. And I guess that leads me into maybe a last question. Taking all of this kind of stuff that we've been discussing over this whole time, what are your thoughts about how we can stand and face this huge unknown but terrible thing that is happening in front of us? Do you have any thoughts about coming from these investigations into self and relationship that you've done and how that might help us?
Well, my first thought, of course, is I'm just thinking right now a lot about like what would it take for huge numbers of people to be disruptive enough? Because
Right.
I think we're in a point where even people who didn't believe this before, that the way that we anarchists do, everyone can see you cannot appeal to the state right now. It's like it's useless. So then it's like I'm semi-curious, like curiosities are like, is it still worthwhile to do like site fights about jails at the local level? Like I had these questions about like where does our politics still appeal to elites, or where is it us organizing and being direct together? How does that work? It's really hard in the anti-war movement. Like the war machine is so big and so overwhelming. Like what are the sites of crisis that we can cause? How do we break it down? And these are really big questions. I'm getting a lot. I reread constantly Vicky's book In Defense of Looting because the
That's so
accounts
good.
in there of huge numbers of people in a not institutionalized way wreaking havoc and bringing everything to a halt really helped me, and like defending each other from evictions and stopping all the trains and whatever. I just love that book, especially chapter 5 if anyone's reading it, In Defense of Looting. That's like currently like a religious text for me. I think that we're up against, like, we're forced to ask ourselves, like, how do I act when things get really hard? What do I need? What would help me be less isolated? What would it be like to take the risk of joining people more frequently? Like, that's what it looks like on the interpersonal level, is like, what comes up for me when I join people and what would help? Oh, I want to bring a friend. Oh, I really want to go to a place where I know the people are going to be masked. I really want to go to a place where I know I'm not the first trans person there. Whatever the things are, and like, it's not going to be perfect, but like, well, how can I start? Most people, it's like, how can I start? Or how can I go back to something that I gave up on that actually I miss and love and think had potential? Like a lot of people, I think our age are like, I need to grieve some unresolved conflicts that happened in the movement years ago that have driven me away from certain parts of the work. What do I have to do to turn that over and actually like return to the parts that I know I have something to offer in, or get new interests that let me be involved? I just think like we're all going to be safer if we know more people, lots of kinds of people. Like some are best friends and some are like the people in the group, some of whom I like and some of whom I don't like. Like how do I have more context and be trying a bunch of things? Like I think everyone should be in an affinity group, and everyone should be in a mutual aid project, and everyone should be in a study group if you can, because those feed different parts of you, and like maybe also in some kind of grief group or group where you're doing something that's about sacredness or ritual or music, like to kind of deal with how intense we all need collective spaces for that kind of processing. Like a lot of this right now is about isolation and everything being on the internet. And the internet, it's really important to connect to people. They're the first trans people I ever met were on the internet. I know that it's really huge for people who have, lack of mobility. It can be a really huge way to break isolation. But I think we're over reliant right now. Most people need some more ways of connecting. If you want to make sure you have people who have your back, who will visit you when you're sick, who will do jail support for you, you got to know people in more ways than just the internet context, if possible, I think, or making those thicker where we can through having phone calls or Zoom or, anything that like adds additional dimensions of connection, I think feels really important right now.
I just want to pull one thing out of there too, because like it connects to this like narrative idea and expectation. Like if more people are coming in and seeing that we can't appeal to the state, that it's not going to save us, the thing that can enable is in terms of disruption is a refusal of continuing to play the roles that are expected of us and permission to take what we want to get to the point of like looting and rioting that Vicky talks about, right? If people are more and more just free to give themselves the permission to fuck shit up, hopefully that'll happen.
I hope so. I do think that, like, to me, liberation is being in reality, being in the current conditions and being able to respond to it. And that's the emotional conditions of like, oh, right now I'm having a reaction that's making me want to like tell everyone in this group to fuck off and that they shouldn't do this plan. And maybe I don't need to stop the group just because of my emotional reaction to that. And also look around. It's time for direct action and mutual aid. Everything else doesn't work like that. Like, can I grieve and let go of my fantasy, any liberal fantasies that are still, they all creep around in our minds of appealing to elites and getting cared for by the state. Okay. The ticket is so up, like it's been up, but it's really like it's really in our faces. Can we meet people who are just beginning to understand that and grieve it? Can we like welcome people into our movements who are newly upset and concerned and afraid and scared and angry? Can we like it's on, it's really on.
Yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you, and I hope that people who are listening to this will be inspired to go and take it on right now too. Yeah, thank you, Dean, for giving me the time.
Thank you for making this wonderful podcast. It's such a great resource.
Yeah, everyone go read this book, and I'll talk to you soon. You've been listening to The Breakup Theory. Please rate and follow us on your podcast platform, and join me over at cawshinythings.com. Bye.